Colonel Umar Abdullah Johnson, and I'm a member of the organization founded by the Right Excellent Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, the Universal Negro Improvement Association. I belong to the Philadelphia division. By trade, I'm a school psychologist. And in the city of Philadelphia, I'm the youngest of only 4 black male school psychologists, although Philadelphia is the 5th largest school district in the city, in America, I'm sorry. I actually happen to be a relative of that man hanging on the wall, Frederick Douglass, whose real name was Frederick Bailey, but he changed it to Douglass when he escaped to slavery, which is my family's name. He's actually a blood cousin. But I just want to give you some information that I hope can help you as you help children and families and parents in your communities and in your neighborhoods. School psychology, exactly what is that? The reason you probably don't know is because it was never intended for you to know. School psychologists are the psychologists who are responsible for evaluating children and determining whether or not they have educational disabilities. Any child who's ever been diagnosed as retarded, learning disabled, emotionally disturbed, autistic, as having a traumatic brain injury, or, in a positive note, those who are ever diagnosed as mentally gifted, only get that diagnosis from one of us, a school psychologist. Why is this such a problem with black children, and why are so many black children over-identified and misrepresented in special education classes? It's because only 1% of all school psychologists in America are black. 99% of them are white. As with your teachers, only 7% are African American, but only 1% of your school psychologists. Now, right from the back, I want to deal with the drugs, because I think a lot of parents still don't understand exactly what Ritalin is, and what Adderall is, and what Prozac is, and what Zoloft is, and what Strattera is. All of these are synthetic forms of the same illegal drugs you could buy on any inner city street corner. It's very important that you understand that Ritalin, the scientific name is methylphenidate, is equivalent chemically to speed that you could buy on any corner. It's classified by the Drug Enforcement Agency as a type 2 drug, which means it's just as addictive as crack cocaine. Now, the pediatrician isn't going to tell you this. Okay, the doctor isn't going to tell you this. The principal, the school teacher isn't going to tell you this, because 9 times out of 10 they're getting a kickback by the drug company. A lot of schools and school districts are actually subsidized and sponsored by these drug companies. So you have to understand exactly the demon that you are fighting. But if you want to deal with the drug movement, you have to go back to the scientific study that was done by the United States government that gave birth to the drug movement. See, the drug movement didn't start 10 years ago. It actually started in the 80s, and it started with the National Institute of Mental Health. And what they did was, if you can think back a little bit to the 80s, you remember there was a big movement in American psychology and psychiatry to prove that black men were predisposed to be violent. If you can remember that. They said we had a gene that made us more violent than everybody else. Nobody wanted to look at the social variables, okay, and the historical variables that give rise to what we suffer. They wanted to reduce it to the level of biology. Why? Because the minute you reduce any problem to the level of biology, now you bring in the doctors, which means you can get rich off of drugs. You have to watch that and be very, very careful about that. But anyhow, what the United States government said, and the man who was in charge of the National Institute of Mental Health at the time was a white man by the name of Peter Goodwin, I believe his name was. They said that if you want to be able to control the behavior of black kids in the inner city, don't study white kids and don't study black kids. Go to Africa and study monkeys in the jungle. This is 1980s. Okay. Now, they said because black people are so emotional and do not have the capacity to control their behavior because they're animalistic, because they don't have the capacity to control their behavior, if you want to control it, then you have to drug them. So every time you give a black child a pill, you are confirming the racist notion that says black people cannot regulate their behavior. And if you want to regulate it, then you must give them drugs. It's as simple as that. Now, they don't tell you about the side effects of these drugs. Number one, they all kill brain cells. To kill brain cells is to kill life. Yes, you have billions of them, but they can die over time and quite rapidly when you give people drugs, especially babies. Most of these drugs were designed for use on who? Adults. Nobody under 18 was ever supposed to be given one. But a few years ago, the American Psychological Association and the Food and Drug Administration said, now you can give adult psychiatric medications to 3-year-old black kids. Zoloft, Prozac, depression, black women, you have to be very careful about those because a lot of you are overdiagnosed for depression, okay? And what you have to understand is every last psychotropic medication that was ever put out in the market has been linked to what? Brain cancer. Every single one. And if you know anything about brain cancer, that's the one form of cancer, although most of them are mortal anyway, but that's the one form of cancer if you get, kiss it goodbye. Okay? Very important. We should not be giving our children drugs. Most of these drugs, especially in the minds of babies and in the bodies of babies, actually destroy the organs of the body. They mess with the liver, the kidneys, the heart. Believe it or not, they even cause the same problems that they're supposed to solve. Ritalin makes you hyperactive. Zoloft makes you depressed. Not only that, but most of these drugs have even been linked to an increase in suicide by those who take them. Most industrialized European nations do not allow psychotropic drugs to be given to their kids. If you go to Britain, they don't even give them out. But see, over here, it's all about dollars and cents. And to make a long story short, white people are making billions because you refuse to raise your children the right way. Bottom line. Why would you go to your enemy and ask them for help on how to raise a black child? That don't make no sense. And that's what's going on. See, in the 1800s and in the early 1900s, there was no such thing as ADHD. ADHD was put in the DSM-4 because it was lobbied for by the drug companies. They went to the American Psychiatric Association that relies on their money to operate and said, look, we need a diagnosis that can feed the prescribing of this drug. So they created ADHD. It's a joke. It don't even exist. Every day I got parents coming to me, Mr. Johnson, my son needed an evaluation. He ADHD. No, he not. 98% of all black boys who are diagnosed with ADHD also don't have a male figure in their life. What do children do when they don't get attention at home? They go to school and act out. Okay, they've been doing that since the beginning of time, but nobody was giving them drugs. But they're giving them drugs now because you begging for it. When I work in the schools, sometimes I got to fight the parents 3 times as hard as I got to fight the black man and the white man in white faces, or the white man in black face, the principals and the school teachers. Okay? Because they just as bad. They just as bad. Okay, once you put a black face on it, the problem normally gets worse because of your trust in the person standing in front of you. You have to stop trusting these Negro principles. I know they got Shaka Zulu on the wall. I know they wear kente cloth, the vests. Okay, but they don't care nothing about our kids. Something between them leaving the hood and going to college and coming back, they lost something. Okay, so you can't be trusting them with your children. One of the interesting things about the diagnosing and prescribing of drugs for kids, I was reading an article in one of the psychological magazines that I subscribe to, and it said that most kids who are prescribed drugs, the referral normally comes from either the teacher or the parent. Now that's ridiculous. Psychiatric drugs, but it's the teachers and the parent who driving the whole process. How can that be? You ain't no psychologist and you're not a psychiatrist. Exactly, and they're trying to reduce the numbers. Okay, but I don't blame them. I blame the parent, because even though black children make up about 75% of all special ed roles, guess what? There wouldn't be a black child sitting in special ed right now if it wasn't for a black parent who signed their life away. See, you can't put a black child in special ed without parental approval. You can't do it. You must get a signature. So behind every black child wasted in special ed is 2 Negro parents or 1 who let them go.
And what about these parents?
Once you put them on the drugs, it's like the door of no return. Okay? Because now what DHS does, and so you understand this, the National Institute of Mental Health is a subsidiary of DHS. Actually, the companies that push the drugs belong to the Department of Health and Human Services. See that. Now, once a child gets put on the drug, then the social work and casework and everybody else come in and do exactly what you said. They criminalize the parent, and you know what they call it? Medical neglect. In other words, if you're giving your child Ritalin and suddenly you hear me tell you to stop, and you get the information and you say, they're not taking that no more, here come the caseworker. Oh, you can't do that. That's medical neglect. He needs this. She needs this. And then they take the kids from you and keep on giving them more drugs. Now you need drugs too because you're in a psychiatric institute because somebody took your babies. Okay? What is the key to all this? Get the information first. Before I leave here today, every last one of you are going to get a card of mine. Okay? And my consultation is free. You just call me. Brother Umar, this is the problem. What do I need to do? Now, because I said that, if I ever see any of you on the street, okay, you better never tell me that your niece or your nephew or your son or your daughter taking drugs because I told you to call me. You don't have no excuse here. A lot of parents out there have excuses because they trust them black people in these schools who don't mean them no good. But you've talked to me today. We have to get our kids off these drugs and stop telling these parents to get their kids evaluated by the psychologist every time something go wrong. You don't need to get evaluated because you got in a fight. You don't need to get evaluated because your parents whipped your butt. You might need some counseling or something like that, but you can get that from grandmom and granddad. Stop going to the white institution for help that you've been giving your family and your kids for centuries. It's ridiculous. Can't no white psychologist help no black child? And I'm going to tell you something else. Homosexuality has very little to do with sexual perversion for black people. For white people, it's a part of their normal development. If you read Freud and Erikson, they say that's a natural, healthy stage that a boy goes to on his way to becoming an adult. So what does that mean if you have a black child wrestling with homosexual identity? If you take them to a white therapist, they're not going to try to get them to come out of that unhealthy lifestyle. They're going to teach them that they were born that way. Most black children who practice homosexuality do it because of a hatred for or a lack of love from a certain sex. Let me give sex parent. Let me give you an example. You got a boy who never seen his mother in his life. Because of that, he might grow up hating women. And so therefore, he might decide that he's only going to be with men. Take a young lady whose father never been in her life, can't stand his guts. She might grow up hating men and decide she's going to spend the rest of her life with women. Very important that you understand this. It's psychosis at the back of all of this, okay? It ain't no, I just want to sleep with girls and I just want to sleep with boys. Look at their history. You can see it so plainly. Also, a boy who never had his daddy in his life, still looking for love from that father figure, will go and get it from a man who can manipulate that into a homosexual relationship. Same thing with a woman. Little girl, I never had my mommy in my life, okay? So I'm looking for a mother figure, and that person who they're looking to can manipulate that into a homosexual relationship. Also, kids who are, what do you call it when they, the word when you play with the kids when they're too young. A kid who is, help me out, molested. A child who is molested. There's something about the first sexual act of a human being that no matter how much you hate that first act, that you will continue to crave it throughout life. So a little boy whose uncle molested him, although he hates the fact that this happened, there's like a paradox in the mind that he still searches it out. He hates the act, but feels that somehow this is what I'm supposed to be because that's what God allowed to happen to me first. See this? You got to get him help. And you can't take them to no white people. And if you take them to a black psychologist or psychiatrist, you better make sure they're not homosexual. See, homosexuality used to be listed as a psychiatric disorder in the DSM-IV. It was just like depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, and everything else. They took it out. You know why? Because you can't be a psychologist and a psychiatrist calling yourself a therapist, and you suffer from psychopathology yourself. So they took it out.